Greetings and salutations, Dopey Nation. I wanna take a walk around the world. I wonder would it do me any good? Until I get some money in my pocket, then I guess I'll just have to walk around my neighborhood. But I wanna be good so bad. I wanna be so good, so bad, so bad. I wanna be good so bad. But bad desire is all I ever had. And I wanna take a ride up in the sky.
All right. Grateful recovering addict Joe. I want to thank you for inviting me to share on Dopey Zoom. And I'm a big fan of the podcast, and I'm now a big fan of Dopey Zoom also. I've made a lot of friends in here. So I am 48 years old, and I have 17 years clean. I got clean when I was 31 years old. I'm just gonna dive right in. I have to watch myself because I have a tendency to like ramble and go on tangents, and I don't like telling my history because I remember it real spotty. But I'm just gonna try to go into it. So I was born in Philadelphia, and I'm half Jewish and I'm half Irish, and I was raised by the Jewish side of the family. My dad left when I was 6 months old, and he was kind of like a mystery in my life for a long time. My grandparents told me that he was a pathological liar. My parents were hippies, and in fact, my last name was made up by my dad because he was dodging the draft for the Vietnam War. So my last name actually has nothing to do with my whatever genetic heritage. And I'm not Italian. Everybody thinks I'm Italian. But so he left when I was 6 months old. I saw him. He came back one day when I was 7, and it was very strange. He like hitchhiked into town, and I met him for one day, and then like we dropped him off on the highway, and he hitchhiked away again. I guess he visited one other time that I don't remember when I was younger. So that's that. I had some trauma when I was younger, but I always felt like I didn't want to let that define my life or hold me down. I just decided, like this wasn't my fault, and I'm going to move past it and not let it mess me up. And boy, I'm so self-conscious. I'm sorry. So my mom was a single mom, and when I had my own kids, I got like so much more respect for that, because like having kids with a great wife, both of us active, and trying to take care of things was hard enough. But having a kid single back then, I have enormous respect for her. She was a painter and an art teacher, and then started designing her own clothing and had a business that took off, and that's how I was supported basically until I left the house. It was her business that she started selling clothing. So, all right, here's, like I don't have a ton of epic dopey stories that are going to make everybody like crack up laughing. But my earliest drug experience I mostly have a memory of this from being told by my mom, but like, so my mom was a hippie and an artist in the 70s, and she was going to a party at a friend of hers house, and she made hash brownies. And so she made like a number of plates of regular brownies, and then she made some hash brownies, and she put little bits of green icing on the hash brownies to differentiate them. And I was like 8 years old, and I was like, I want the brownie with the green icing. I want the brownie with the green icing. And then she said, no, those are for the grown ups. And when everybody else was in the other room of the party, I actually climbed up on a chair and grabbed the whole tray of brownies with green icing and ate like five of them, and then ran around the party and passed out. So that is genuinely my first drug experience. But so my mom met a guy, and we ended up moving from Philly to New York State. And I I was from, like we were in a neighborhood called Germantown, and which is getting close to North Philly. So I went from that to this like hick town, where there were like cows and people that grew potatoes, and I didn't fit in well with the kids. And I was a nerdy kid too. I was into playing Dungeons and Dragons and stuff. And middle school was pretty traumatic. I was definitely, I was dressed like a hippie, and I definitely was not fitting in with all these kids out in the sticks. And so eventually in summer camp, I met some kids, some older kids, and they smoked a bunch of hash with me. And this was like 12 or something, 11 or 12. And it was like on a beach, on a lake. And I remember practically hallucinating off of the hash, like seeing like kaleidoscopes and stuff. But I got a taste for it there. And then when I was back home, I was looking in my mom's attic, and I found like an ounce of old shake, like an ounce of weed that had probably like been in the bottom of a box for like 5 years, for all I know. And I showed it to this teenage girl who was my neighbor, and I sold it to her and her boyfriend for $5 if they would teach me how to smoke it. And I think from there, I mean, or pretty soon after, um, I never stopped smoking pot for like 31 years, except when I was doing dope and wanted to spend my money on that instead. Um, then I finally got out of that town and moved to a place that was somewhat more urban, where one friend in here is from, a town called Poughkeepsie, not Rochester. And when I got there and started going to high school, my using definitely took off, and I just started taking acid like crazy pretty soon. And it was around all the time. So smoking pot and taking acid almost every day, it seems like. I remember making shroom and peanut butter sandwiches and eating them in the cafeteria with my friend, and then tripping all day at school and cutting classes. And this one time we did that. That was like a regular routine. And this one time we did that, and I had this like weird, embarrassing viral rash on my chest. I'm like 13 or something. I had this rash on my chest, and unbeknownst to me, my mom had made an appointment with a dermatologist, and so I had eaten a lot of shrooms, and I was hiding from teachers and classes, and then I walked past the office or whatever, and they're like, we've been looking all over for you, and your mom made an appointment. There's a cab coming for you in like 5 minutes. So I got to go to the dermatologist's office, like completely tripping my face off, and like sit in this yellow room and have like the cold stethoscope put all over me. Um, so that's some dumb shit. I I I eventually got into to punk rock there in like ninth grade, and kind of fell into that crowd after experimenting around with metal and Grateful Dead, and I had been into like hip hop and stuff since I was a kid in Philly. But I fell in with some punk rockers because they were crazy and they looked crazy, and I made friends with some, and I was taking acid with them, and then I made one particular friend who had lived in this town for a long time, and he started showing me around the town that I had just moved to, and then I met a ton of people through this one particular friend who, for a few years there, I kind of like followed along after him. We almost like looked similar too, but eventually he got me a job when I was like 15 or so in this rock club that was in town, and it was a pretty cool place. And I thought I was so cool that I was like 15 years old and working in a bar and seeing rock bands. And we were like sister clubs with the Brits down in the city. So we got to see cool bands coming through. A lot of people started their tours at that club, and it had a whole bunch of history. And the thing I was thinking about this period is that like almost all my friends, a lot of my friends were older. Like I was always trying to be older than I was back then, and I thought it was cool as shit if I was getting fucked up with the people that were 5 years older than me or 10 years older than me. Um, I I saw a ton of bands, a ton of great bands, a ton of like horrible hair metal bands from the '80s and local bands, um, and I barely remember any of it because I was always drunk and on acid and smoking pot, and I have a lot of regrets for not remembering stuff well from that place. Um, and like I said, I thought one part of me definitely thought I was cool as shit because there were other kids in high school that were like asking people in the 7-Eleven parking lot to buy them a 12 pack of Meisterbrow. And I was hanging out at the club, and I could have free drinks, and I could have free drinks at the other clubs in the bar, and like I was cool and I was a grown up, and I was with all the tough, scary punk rockers and blah blah blah. And I, at this time, like my parents had their own thing going on. Like I had known that my stepdad was using coke. I knew because I snuck into their room and looked through their drawers and stuff, and I would steal some of it sometimes. And stuff got kind of crazy at home. Like they would they were pretty permissive and everything, but they wanted me to do good in school and this and that, and I just did whatever I wanted to do, and I had a lot of anger at authority, anger at my parents, and you know, another time once I had my own kids, I'm like, I hope they don't act like me when they're teenagers. And like they would. My stepdad found all my marijuana paraphernalia in a bag and threw it all out and flushed the bag. And I got so pissed, and we had this. They had this, like, sit down and have the family discussion kind of moment. And I was just like, and I thought this was a cool story too. Today, I don't think it's that impressive. I used to think it was cool, but I was just like, well, how can you tell me not to smoke pot when you guys have cocaine and blah 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 blah? And like, my parents backed down, and my mom was like, well, you know, try to only smoke pot on the weekends. Don't smoke pot when you have to go to school, and try to smoke pot at home. And anyway, it progressed a little bit, and like eventually I got in like some minor fisticuffs with my stepdad, who I never got along with, and he was basically like, like, you need to. This is probably 16, 17, 16. He's like, you need to straighten up and follow the rules in this house, or you're out of here. And I said, okay, man, I'm out of here. And I left home at about that age, and I started couch surfing around town and staying with friends. And I uh, I had some. I was still working at this club, but somewhere in there I'm not somewhere in there it closed down for a while. Um, Maybe that's not yet, but anyway, I had a year where I was like, I was trying to deal marijuana. That didn't work out very well because I smoked most of it with my friends, and I was like working in two or three restaurants, at that club and a couple other venues in town. I was just working all the time, and I still gone to school too. And it was like, one funny story to me back then was just that, like, there was one guy, like, who had who I would work with at the bar, and we would close down the bar together and sweep up all the mess, and like, have a drink together after work. And then the next morning I would go into high school, and he would be my substitute homeroom teacher, and I had just seen him like 2 hours before. Or like I partied with another guy, um, took a bunch of acid and stuff, and then I found out that one of the metalheads that I talked to in the smoking lounge in high school, uh, was actually his stepson, which bugged me out. I saw my teachers at the bar sometimes. Just more of that, like, I was so into that at the time. I was into to to being older than I actually was, and I I had a roommate who was about 10 years older than me, and had really taken me in, and helped me find a place to stay when I left my house. And he was the older punk rocker, and he was into smoking crack a lot. And I would see him smoke crack, and I would always give him shit about it at first because, like I said, I was trying to deal weed at that time, and he would always be smoking my pot with me. And and I'm like, why do you need that shit? Why don't you just smoke pot with me? You know, just smoke pot. We have all the pot we want. Let's just smoke pot. And you know, like eventually the place we were staying burned up, and we were basically staying with this woman who didn't really want us there anymore. And we moved to another house in a slightly worse neighborhood, and it became like people smoking crack all the time. And and I still like held off. I was doing my own thing. I was working at a few bars and restaurants, and you know, not dealing anymore. I was just drinking a lot and smoking a lot, and I clearly remember like my 17th birthday, like I just being really depressed at like the bullshit, boring scene of people smoking crack around me all the time, and really depressed that you know like I didn't feel like I didn't feel like any of the people that I was close friends with were still hanging out with me, and I had nothing to do but work and hang out with people that uh, weren't entertaining, that I wasn't as interested in, and I remember very clearly my 17th birthday. This guy giving me my first hit of crack, and you know that started off like a close to a 2 year crack binge, and I was still working all the time, and basically my friend and I were not scared to go into the scary neighborhoods. He knew a lot of people in town, and so when people wanted to cop, they would come to us and we would cop for them, and then get smoked out. And you know, I have like, it's crazy. I have like so few memories of that time because it's like all the same thing again and again. But you know, like I remember the one restaurant I worked at where the chef was pretty cool, and and I came into work in the morning or the evening or whatever it was, and he was like, you know, I saw your car parked on Cottage Street, like you know, 5 different times last night. Like you know, like he knew completely what was going on with me. My car was very big and ugly and very obvious, but I you know, like somehow like okay, so this is for me. It was kind of an important moment. I had this one night where like a friend of my friend had a whole bunch of money to burn, and all of us were, you know, locked up in this back room and smoking and smoking and smoking and smoking. And then, you know, every time we ran out, he would send us out for more. We're not going to get any more. I mean, I think any of you that have done it know how that goes. You just keep going till the money runs out. And I just remember doing it for so long, my heart beating so fast, you know, like you know, like I really felt like I was gonna die that night, and I left that place and like watched the sunrise, and I had this moment where I was like, and you know, like I must have been 18. I had this moment where I was like, you know, if I keep doing this, I'm not going to be me anymore. That was like the thought that you know, like I will cease to be myself. I will become someone completely different, and I just can't. And I put it down. This other friend of mine, he played basketball with me for a few days, and and I sweated out, and I didn't pick that stuff up again for a long time. It's taken much longer than I thought. I knew this was going to happen. So I put the crack down. The club had closed, and I started driving taxi cabs. I drove taxi cabs for like 3 years after that, and I have some crazy memories. I used to take acid and drive a taxi cab on 12-hour shifts, and I don't know if you can imagine that, but like I remember like driving down the road and watching the road waver back and forth while I was driving. I remember like picking up a respectable elderly black woman on her way to church, and she's in the back of the cab and like turning around and looking at her face and seeing her face go, like and driving cabs. This is a somewhat dangerous little city we were living in, and driving cabs put me in some crazy situations. And like I had a place where I was taking speed pills, but the end of that story is I started having recurring dreams where like I would drive these 12-hour shifts with the cab, and then I would go to sleep at night, and then I would see the yellow line coming at me like I was still driving, and then I would like wake up in a sweat and be like, oh shit, it was just a dream, and then go back to sleep, and then see the yellow line coming at me again, and then like have really lousy sleep, and 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 then have to 6 a.m. get in the cab and start seeing the yellow line drive at me again, and I bugged out, and I just quit. I mean, like my boss was a crackhead that tried to kill my friend with a tire iron once too. It was definitely like a bad scene, and I, like a week after that, I found out that this cab driver that I knew picking up someone at the same time of night, same bad neighborhood as I had done hundreds of times, just got shot in the back of the head for whatever he had on him, which was probably less than a couple $100. And I'm like, yeah, that was a good move to leave that job. Um, and also at the same time as that, during that time, I started going to community college and trying to get back into school and make something of myself. Um, I liked school. I was always a big reader. I just didn't do well in it. I did well when I wanted to. I did well on tests, but I didn't like doing homework. Um, so I started going back to school, and eventually, I got a 2-year degree in like 3 years. I'm gonna skip some stories because it's taking too long. And I, eventually got my 2-year degree and was able to get into a 4-year college, and I'm just smoking pot and drinking again at this point. And I moved up to Albany and went to college there. And I took like a pretty ambitious. I was a philosophy and English double major, and that was the stuff I was into. I figured if I'm not interested in it, I'm not going to study at all. So I tried to pick stuff that I was interested in instead of the stuff that would actually make me money. And I was doing okay in school. I had a girlfriend. I lived with her for like 6 years during that time period, and she liked to drink a lot, and she was a bulimic. Like the lesson I learned from that was kind of like it was almost like like a mutual non-aggression pact or something. Like she didn't give me crap for smoking pot all the time, and I didn't give her crap about being bulimic and drinking. And we like never fought, and people thought that we were a great couple and we got along real great. But there's also just like nothing going on with it, like um And, years later, we just kind of eventually drifted apart and remained friends. So I went to college up there, and then when it got hard, like I had always skated by doing all the reading and then like doing the homework at the very last second and pulling it off. But when I got to what would have been my senior year in college, that no longer worked. Like because I had all this reading and I had all these papers to write, and I I just I just couldn't keep up with the work anymore, not with my normal MO, and I couldn't change it. I couldn't figure out how to change it. So basically, I dropped out of college, and I don't even have the excuse of so-called heavy drugs, just behind drinking and smoking pot too much and not being a good student. Um, so I dropped out of college up there, and I started painting houses all over the place. And then eventually, like I had a bunch of friends that also had moved up there, and eventually I fell in with with a guy who was a junkie. It was a friend of a good friend of mine, and he was in the methadone program, and he had the virus, and I started trying heroin, and like I was the chippiest chippy heroin guy for like years. Like I thought I could, like I had no tolerance, and I would just take take the tiniest little bit and just get a high like once a week. I got into it so slow, and and I saw this friend. I ended up hanging out with him quite a bit, and he was in his late 50s, I guess, and he had AIDS and was on the methadone program, and I would take him to the clinic. That's another thing to mention. Like I used to take the methadone patients to the clinic when I was a cab driver before too, so I had some experience with methadone clinics. But I he was kind of a mess, but he was a great guy. He liked following fish, which I didn't. But I saw the way he was living, and I did not want that. I remembered years later that I did not want that. It didn't stop me from getting into it. I have another friend who's clean now that apologized for introducing me to this guy, um, even though he wasn't really the one who introduced me to him. But I thought that was the most ridiculous thing. I mean, I guess it was nice of him, but like I never blamed anyone for. I usually went into my drug use pretty eyes wide open, and I take responsibility for my bad choices. But so I got into that, and then eventually we decided to move out of that town and go into New York because this girlfriend had to take care of her grandmother, and the plan was that we would move to New Jersey for just a little while, get jobs in the city, and then move into the city. Um, so the one friend, the methadone guy with AIDS, introduced me to another old friend of his that lived in New Jersey who had a pool cleaning business because I needed a job when I first moved down there. So this pool cleaning guy was another hippie. He also had AIDS, but he was taking care of himself much better. And he would pick me up at like 4 in the morning, and then we would drive across the George Washington Bridge, either into Harlem or into the South Bronx, and uh, take these like adventures. Like we would go from methadone clinic to methadone clinic, try to find out where the best stamps were, and then basically the guy would pay me whatever it was, $10 an hour. And we would drive around all day copping. He would give me free dope, and then we would clean maybe one pool, and then I would go home all fucked up. But and he was a really good guy. But that couldn't last forever. But my habit increased with that, and then I found myself a job in New York City. The relationship with that girl kind of just dissipated. Um, she didn't like who I was on heroin as much as she liked who I was before heroin. Imagine that. And I I moved into New York City, and my habit with that stuff gradually took off. And I still like, and I'm going to tell this part of it just because this is what I feel like kept me out so long, because I thought I could manage it. I thought, and it seems so dumb now, but I thought I was smarter than the average addict. You know, I now know that I'm just your average Joe addict. But I thought I could manage my using, and I had some willpower with it, and I had some limited success for a lot of years. I would have these, like I said before, like these crazy chippy habits. I would like only use on days when I didn't have to work the next day, and I would like stick to that, and make myself stick to that. And it would be so weird because even though I didn't have the same kind of full blown habit that I ended up with later or had before, I would still get sick, like in a minor way. It was still like a miserable existence. And I mean, that continued. Like I had all these little techniques where I thought that I could manage it and pull it off. And I guess I was a so-called functioning addict for a bunch of years until I wasn't. But basically that continued. I got arrested a couple times, and I feel like this has been totally boring. That's why I don't tell my using stories so much. But so I'm gonna try to wind down towards the end soon. But like I had an old friend who I had known since I was like 15 or something, and this is flashing forward for a second. When I first got clean, I was in this halfway house down here in South Florida, and I felt like, what the fuck am I doing here? I felt like I did not identify with anyone that I was stuck in this halfway house with. I felt like, if I used with these people, they would get me busted in a heartbeat. I wouldn't want to use with these people. Narcotics Anonymous, I felt like it was, I didn't know what the hell was going on there. I felt like I didn't fit in. And I'm like, there's nobody that can relate to me, like a New York junkie punk rock guy. There's nobody that could relate to me. And then this old friend who I grew up with showed up like out of the blue, and he had been locked up for a couple of years, but he was clean. And so the point is that he was sort of showing me around Narcotics Anonymous. And at that time, we'd hear a lot of people in meetings say real dramatically, like, I've seen a lot of people die to this disease, which is true enough and everything, but you would hear it every meeting. It's like, I've heard a lot of people die. I've seen a lot of people die from this disease. You hear it so much, it's almost like takes some of the power out of it. It doesn't sound as sincere if it's just like a tagline, you know what I'm saying? And so his line, and it's never never as funny when I try to say it, but he was like, just once I want to hear someone say that I've seen two monkeys fucking due to this disease, or or something different, and like my variation on that when I thought about it was like I've seen a lot of bad TV due to this disease, because I remember those years that I was smoking crack. I'd always end up in a room with a bunch of people, and nobody could decide on a TV show to watch. So we'd all be sitting around, and that channel, like the TV guide channel, would just scroll past for hours and hours and hours with some like idiotic infomercial droning on in the background, and just like horrible memories of being stuck with that all geeked out. And I, and the reason I brought it up at that point and flash forward is because, like the end of my time in New York City, I had lost a couple jobs. I had one job that wasn't giving me a lot of shifts, and I was in this apartment in Brooklyn where like the leaseholder, this girl had just up and taken off to Africa, and left me with her dog. And the other roommates were junkies, and they just didn't pay the rent and took off, and I didn't pay the rent. And so I was basically sitting in this apartment with almost no money, dope sick all the time, waiting to be evicted. And the only channel I could get was the WB11 in New York City. And I would watch the WB11 from like when it came on the air at 5 in the morning until it went off the air at 3 in the morning or whatever it was. I'd sit there in this apartment and just watch. I remember being dope sick and like crying at real poignant scenes in the day's episode of Pokemon or something, like or watching just idiotic game shows. And like that to me was like one, it wasn't being locked up in jail for the weekend. It wasn't losing girlfriends or losing jobs. That to me was one of the worst bottoms, just being all by myself, stuck in this apartment with nothing to do but watch the same channel every day, and hope to scrape up like $10 to stave off my dope sickness. And that eventually ended, and I went back home, back to New York State. And my mom had some medical issues. That was my excuse, but the main thing was that I needed help. I needed to get out of that situation, and I left New York City like a month before 9/11. I left, August 2001, and where I was working was a couple blocks from the World Trade Center. So I mean, I kicked around and kept using up there for like another 3 years, and got into more trouble and got worse and worse. And kind of like what I was saying before, like it wasn't like my worst bottom, that like I talk about they talk about life being unmanageable. Like I thought my life was manageable, but right before I got clean, I was living with that old friend again, the one who was 10 years older than me, and I started smoking crack with, and his mom, and he was on unemployment, and his mom was on Social Security, and I was working at like 2 or 3 restaurants and doing my habit, and I thought that was manageable because I wasn't locked up and I had a roof over my head. But so it wasn't any specific bottom that drove me to get clean. I just one day finally got tired of the whole routine, and And, like I have done exactly what I didn't want to do. I spoke for like now 50 minutes on the using and haven't gotten to the recovery. And the using wasn't even entertaining. But, so, like I asked for help, and I'm not someone who had gone to detoxes or rehabs. I never had any interest, so I went to a detox and it sucked. I had a fairly big habit at the time, and they're like, you can have 7.5 milligrams of methadone the first day, and 5 the next, and 2.5 the next, and then I kicked around and I went into a rehab, and I got a taste of it for the first time in there because like for basically 31 years I hadn't spent a day without using something, and I thought about that and realized it, and I wasn't buying it right away, but after a couple of weeks, I felt like a little healthier for once, and like I said, I was sick of the whole lifestyle and routine at that point, and I looked at the 12 steps on the wall, and I'm like, in the second step it says higher power, and then all of a sudden they're calling it God. It's like it's it's a bait and switch, like, and like I was ready to talk myself out of having anything to do with it, and then I just needed it. I took another look, and I'm like, okay, what do I object, except for like not necessarily believing in God? What do I object in this? And I didn't really. So I took the opportunity they offered me to go down to a halfway house in South Florida. It was February in New York State with like 2 feet of snow on the ground. So I took that opportunity and I came down here. And like I said, I didn't know if it would work for me at first. Um, I was skeptical, but like I even like I decided I would try to think about being clean as like a new high, because it was a new state of consciousness for me, because I had not been not high for so many years, and I started going to meetings, and I heard a lot of bullshit at first. I heard people say, "Oh, you go to NA and not AA, you're gonna get high. I'll see you on the crack corner. I'll see you at the crack spot next week." And I had people say, if you don't believe in God, you'll never get it. You're gonna get high. You know, um, and like I was high for a bunch of years, and I was still pretty burnt. But like I also have a bullshit detector. Like so like I read the literature for myself, and I looked for people that I could trust and could believe, and I said, all right, I'm just going to give this a shot. And like I said, I didn't know if it was going to work, but I gave it not a shot. I figured if it doesn't work, then maybe I'll go to California and try it out there. But it started working. You know, just the just the feeling of not having something in my pocket that was illegal, just the feeling of not looking for a bathroom that I could hide in, just feeling of not having any warrants, just that immediately, and being past being dope sick, just that immediately was a big difference that made me feel a lot better. And mind you, I came down here and I had 3 abscess teeth that were like throbbing in my mouth, and I was in like a ton of pain, and I knew where to find heroin the first day I was down here. I had people trying to sell me oxys, and like I had been self medicating my bad teeth for many a year. Um, I managed to tough it out until I could go to the emergency room and get some antibiotics. But you know what worked for me was the stupid thing that one of the things that worked for me was the stupid thing they told me in rehab, which was try to identify, not compare. Like I would listen to people talk about their stuff, and I started to realize that I wasn't, as they say, terminally unique and fatally cool. Like I always had this whole drama going in my head about, how life sucked so much, and everything was unfair, and fuck this and fuck that and fuck all of them. And, like, so what does it matter if I get high because I'm not hurting anybody but myself? And, and I might as well get high because there's nothing else good in the world, basically, because that's what I had trained myself to feel happiness from. And like that, once I started being honest with myself and listening to other people's stories, that kind of like self justification and the lie that I told myself kind of like fell away. Like it was like I honestly like looked at myself and I'm like, what was so horrible about your life that you need is as much opiates as a cancer patient just to get through the fucking day? Like, I mean, people have all kinds of issues, but I didn't. Like I have plenty of emotional issues, and my mind is still burnt out. But I didn't have pain issues where I needed opiates. Um, and it just didn't make sense to me. Like, and I could sit back there and think that, you know, well, I never stole thousands of dollars from my parents like that guy over there did. Um, my parents didn't have thousands of dollars to steal, but like I would have thoughts like that, like, I didn't hurt anybody but myself. But then when I stopped for a second and thought about it, I'm like it wasn't just that it wasn't that I didn't do bad things to people, but that I wasn't there for so long to do anything good for anyone. And there were people that I loved in my life. Like I mean, I actually, through all that boring story, I actually like have like a ton of friends. Like I made a ton of friends in my life, and there's a ton of people that I love. I love my parents, and like, and I wasn't there for them, and I could have been. I mean, it's too late for any of that, but it's not too late for me to be there for people today. And and that's what I've said for years, is that what I'm most grateful for in recovery is that like I'm present in my life now, and that's the truth. That's the honest truth for me. I mean, I'm still not as present as I'd like to be honest. But I was so absent for so many years. You I can barely remember it. I was literally the Walking Dead, and I came back into like a human existence once I got clean, and like I'm so grateful for it today. I and it, just for me, I'm not trying to push anything on anybody, but for me, what worked was Narcotics Anonymous. Like it saved my life. I I don't think that I'm cured. I'm not recovered. I continue to work on myself, and I continue to have problems. I also don't think the 12 steps are the cure for everything in my life or anyone else's life. They're like a tool, a very valuable tool for me. Um, but I need other tools also, and I turn other places for spiritual guidance. I one of the things that sounds like bullshit when you come into Narcotics Anonymous is you have these people that are saying you'll have a life beyond your wildest dreams. That's one of the things people say. And one of my friends in NA says, like and I agree with her, like I don't necessarily have everything I want, but I want everything I have. You know what I mean? And my wildest dreams, I didn't have dreams. I had surrendered to being an addict. Like I had decided, like once a junkie, always a junkie. I wasn't trying to stop being a junkie, and I thought that I would probably die a junkie or end up being locked up. And I did not see it, and that was my biggest fear too. Is I didn't know who I would be if I wasn't using drugs. If I wasn't using drugs, I wouldn't be me anymore. So I was scared of that change, like because I had no idea who the heck I would be. But anyway, I didn't have any dreams. Um, but you know, here's a story, and I have to wind down soon, I guess. But I feel so bad because I didn't, I knew I wasn't going to tell the story I wanted to tell. But anyway, here's a story I love to tell. Is I had 4 months clean, or even before that, like my first recovery job was in a chain bookstore because I had bookstore experience from up north, and that's where I met my wife. I probably had 2 weeks clean, and I walked into that bookstore and applied, and she was the person that took my application, and I got the job for a while, and I was watching this beautiful redheaded manager, and I started flirting with her and becoming friends, and I had about 4 months clean, and I was leaving work, and she was asking me where I was going, and there was an NA meeting right around the corner from that store at that time, and I'm like, well, I'll be back in a little while, and I'll tell you. And I came back a little while, and I said I was at she was on another break, and I said I was at a Narcotics Anonymous meeting, and I basically said, she disputes me on the exact words, but I basically said, like I I'm a heroin addict. I have 4 months clean. I'm riding a bicycle. I have no money. I'm living in a halfway house, and I think you should go on a date with me. You know, and she said no. And then she said, "Let me ask my dad." and but then she went on a date with me. And and that was important to me. Like I live a life where I was dishonest, more to myself than anybody else, but I was dishonest to everybody my whole life. And I live a life where I can be honest about stuff like that. Like I miss that sometimes, like that early recovery courage, because I felt like I had been down so far. fuck do I have to lose? I can walk into a place and be like, I want this job. If they say no, oh well. I can ask the girl out. If the girl says I'm not interested, oh well. It can't get any worse than it was for me before. So what do I have to lose? So, like wildest dreams, like a few years later, we got married. A year after, we had our son. I'm like a homeowner now. I have a 12-year-old son. I have an 8-year-old daughter. The homeowner thing, because for a brief period, like I was homeless in New York City. And I remember sleeping on steam grates near NYU. Where I was worried that a crackhead was going to stab me in the middle of the night. I remember the cops would come along and like bang the baton on the concrete to wake you up at 5 a.m. and move along. And like that was my existence. And now I get to pay a mortgage, like and have a house of my own. And so it's pretty fucking crazy. But these are the material things. It's the first thing I said that really matters. It's like I'm present in my life now. And I have a life to be present in. I don't know. I love to talk about recovery with you guys, and I'll be dropping in Dopey Zoom again, when I have the time. But all I can say is that for me it was worth it. And like what I wanted to say too is that I was scared to go into Dopey Zoom at first, not because I was scared to view people, but like I was scared that it was going to be a bunch of war stories, and like a bunch of like glorifying drug use. And and I don't mind laughing at that stuff any more than the next person, and I do, and I love the podcast. But and there's plenty of recovery in the podcast too. But what I found when I went into Dopey Zoom was totally different. Like it was a meeting of recovery. It's not in the format of 12 steps. What it does have is what it does have is fellowship. What it does have is people sharing and getting vulnerable. What it does have is everybody wanting to help each other, and those are key elements in what helped get me clean in NA. The steps were too. So, I'm a person that loves the 12 steps, but Dopey Zoom is an incredible thing. And I believe that, like that kind of fellowship and community is something that is valuable to be there for people, whether they're entirely abstinent, whether they're medically assisted, whether they're, still using and just interested in the community, or whether they're a 12-step person like me, that this stuff works, and I'm very impressed with Dopey Zoom, and privileged to be a member of it. And I'm gonna stop there because I've just bored you to death for an hour and 10 minutes. Thanks for letting me share.
And I want to take a ride up in the sky and watch as aeroplanes just pass me by. And I want to see a Learjet liner take a dive just to show all of these people what it means to be alive. And I want to be good so bad. I want to be so good, so bad, so bad. I want to be good so bad. But bad desires all I ever had. And my shadow